That seems pretty basic. That seems like a basic truth that we should all be able to agree on. Republicans, by contrast, are recognizing that a constitutional republic depends on the free and open exchange of ideas that we can debate without violence, and that assassinating a political rival is evil, it's wrong, and it should not be glorified or promoted or justified in any way, including in the way that Congresswoman Ilhan Omar did. So Mr. Patel, thank you again for being here. I'd like to, with the remainder of my time, just get your opinion. Does the FBI recognize the rising threat of political violence in America, and what can you guys do to address it?
Yes, we do, and what we can do to address it, Congressman, is we need to get online partnerships with these companies in the public space, on these gaming sites and on these social media sites. As I was saying earlier, there is no way to triage the amount of information generated on these sites by the FBI alone. And we need the public-private partnership. And there's another law that's expiring, I think, at the end of this month, which I believe we need renewed, that allows private sector companies to report into the FBI without liability for criminal investigatory purposes. And that's the kind of stuff we need to keep going.
Got it. Thank you, Director Patel. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Arizona.
I have some UCs.
In a tense and unforgettable congressional hearing, emotions ran high as lawmakers confronted one of the nation's most alarming trends, the growing acceptance of political violence. What began as a call for unity and accountability quickly unraveled into a fiery confrontation that laid bare the deep divisions shaping American society. The turning point came when a Republican lawmaker took the floor and directly accused segments of the political left of normalizing aggression against those who think differently. The room grew tense. What started as policy debate evolved into a moral reckoning, a clash over the boundaries of free speech, the value of human life, and the fragile line separating disagreement from hatred. You could see the discomfort ripple across the chamber as harsh truths surfaced, forcing everyone to confront just how far the nation's political discourse has fallen. Before diving deeper into that moment, it's crucial to understand a man at the center of this storm, Charlie Kirk. A well-known conservative commentator and founder of Turning Point USA, Kirk was never one to shy away from controversy. His outspoken views on politics, culture, and faith made him a lightning rod in national debates. To critics, he was polarizing, a provocateur who fueled division. But to his supporters, he embodied the courage to speak uncomfortable truths and defend traditional American principles. Tragically, his name became the focus of a disturbing online firestorm when news of his death sparked shocking reactions from some corners of social media. Instead of compassion, there were cheers, posts celebrating a political opponent's demise. That grotesque display of cruelty set the tone for what will become one of the most emotionally charged congressional showdowns in recent history. A debate that forced the nation to ask, have we lost our moral compass?
See request, and then you can, we'll let you go, but we appreciate that. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you again for taking the time, Director Patel, and for Chairman Jordan for holding this hearing. Thank you for depoliticizing the FBI and getting it back to its original mission as well. Director Patel, do you agree that we have a problem in the United States with politically motivated violence?
Absolutely.
And I very much agree. I think we can all agree that political violence is wrong, it's evil, regardless of which side it comes from, and that we can all adamantly and vehemently reject it, or we certainly should. But one of the things that we've noticed recently is that affinity and tolerance for political violence is not equally distributed on both sides of the aisle. In fact, right now, social media is filled with leftists who are cheering on the murder of an iconic conservative political figure, Charlie Kirk. And it's not just random people on Twitter doing this now. There's a YouGov poll released just a few days ago, which stated that 25% of those who identify as very liberal believe that political violence can sometimes be justified. That's far too many, is it not?
The Republican lawmaker from Texas didn't mince words. From the moment he took the microphone, his tone made it clear he was done with double standards. He began by citing new polling data that stunned the room. Nearly 1 in 4 self-identified very liberal Americans now believe that political violence can sometimes be justified. By contrast, only 3% of conservatives agreed with that idea. With conviction in his voice, he declared that even a single percentage point should be unacceptable in a country built on democratic debate, not destruction. But the sharp divide, he argued, wasn't just a statistic. It was evidence of something deeper, a cultural decay, a growing belief that violence is permissible when it targets the right people, meaning those with opposing political views. His words landed hard. For a moment, the hearing fell into an uneasy silence. You could feel the discomfort in the air, a mix of disbelief and quiet recognition that this was bigger than party lines. Then came the moment that stopped everyone cold. The congressman read aloud a social media post written by Representative Ilhan Omar, reacting to the death of Charlie Kirk. In that post, Omar compared Kirk to Dr. Frankenstein, claiming that his own monster turned on him, a metaphor that implied he was somehow responsible for his own death. The chamber went still. Lawmakers exchanged stunned glances, some visibly shaken by what they had just heard. The congressman didn't hold back. He called the statement morally repugnant, arguing that when elected officials use that kind of language, they don't just blur the line between rhetoric and violence. They erase it entirely. Instead of condemning political brutality, he said, such words give it permission to grow.
It is.
One is far too many.
One is far too many. That's right. Only 3% of very conservatives said the same thing, and we can agree that 3% is far too many. But there's an astounding difference between 25% on the left accepting and tolerating political violence and 3% on the right. I would hope that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle would also recognize that there is a systemic problem on their side of the aisle with tolerance for violence against people with whom they politically disagree, that there is a cultural rot on their side of the aisle that needs to be addressed desperately. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
One of the more astounding aspects of this is that it's not just people. This comes from the very top, from their political leaders. Just a few days ago, a member of Congress of this body, Ilhan Omar.
The congressman followed up with a challenge that resonated far beyond the walls of the hearing room. He looked straight into the cameras and said what millions of Americans at home were already thinking. If a Republican had made those same remarks about a Democrat, he argued, every major news outlet in the country would still be talking about it. The headlines would be relentless, the outrage nonstop. But because the comments targeted a conservative, there was near silence. That, he said, is the clearest proof of all, a double standard that cuts deep, a media culture where outrage is selective and moral judgment shifts depending on who's being attacked. His words hit a nerve. Across the room, faces tightened, and for a moment, no one spoke. It was a statement that perfectly captured what many conservatives have felt for years, that their pain, their losses, and even their humanity are often dismissed, while inflammatory rhetoric from the left gets a pass. The conversation then turned to the broader question, just how serious is the threat of political violence in America today? FBI Director Patel didn't sugarcoat it. He confirmed that the danger is both real and escalating. He explained that the Bureau now works closely with social media platforms and even gaming networks to track online conversations and identify potential threats before they erupt into violence. But beneath his calm, professional tone, there was something else, a sense of how overwhelming that task has become. Monitoring an endless digital landscape of anger, conspiracy, and hate is no small feat the congressman sees on that hesitation. He pressed Patel further, asking the question many were afraid to voice. Is the FBI applying the same level of scrutiny to politically motivated violence from the left as it does to the right? The question hung in the air, sharp, direct, and impossible to ignore. Patel didn't give a clear answer, but sometimes silence says more than words ever could.
Shared a video on her social media account about Charlie Kirk's murder, and I'll quote what it said. It said, Charlie Kirk was Dr. Frankenstein, and his monster shot him through the neck. In other words, Charlie had it coming to him. The words that he said naturally led to his assassination. I mean, that is a reprehensible thing for a member of Congress to say, to suggest, to promote in any capacity. And there are people across this country who are losing their jobs for far less than this. And that, by the way, is a just response to acceptance and tolerance of political violence. It's amazing to me that the political left today, who were the originators and the cheerleaders of cancel culture, now have the backbone to attack conservatives for defending their assassinated friend. But there's a key difference here. Democrats want to silence conservatives for speaking obvious, self-evident, ontological truths like that men aren't women and men can't get pregnant.
In the aftermath of the hearing, political analysts, along with AI-driven media monitors, offer a sobering interpretation of what had just unfolded. Many described it as one of the most vivid illustrations yet of ideological decay within modern American politics. Their conclusion was unanimous. Political violence must be condemned, no matter which side it comes from. Yet, they noted a disturbing reality: growing evidence that some voices on the far left have begun to rationalize or even celebrate violence when it targets conservatives. The analysis went further, exposing a painful contradiction. The same individuals who once led campaigns to cancel offensive speech or punish insensitive remarks now appear strangely comfortable mocking or excusing physical harm against their political opponents. That kind of moral inconsistency, the report warned, is more than hypocrisy. It's a sign of a collapsing ethical foundation. But this moment wasn't about one politician or a single social media post. The hearing revealed something far more pervasive: a cultural sickness taking root across America's institutions, infecting both politics and public discourse. When elected leaders share comments suggesting that someone brought upon themselves, they don't just make a statement. They set a precedent. They tell millions watching that violence, under the right circumstances, can be justified. That, the congressman warned, is the most dangerous message of all. Because once a society begins to excuse harm against those it disagrees with, it crosses a threshold that's difficult to return from. The moral guardrails crumble. Debate turns to hostility. And the democratic fabric that once bound the nation together begins to tear apart, thread by thread. His closing words echoed like a warning shot. A free society cannot survive if its citizens stop seeing one another as human beings first and opponents second. Once that truth is forgotten, democracy doesn't just weaken, it starts to die.
What I do know for sure is that, Charlie was someone who once said, guns save lives. After a school shooting. Charlie was someone who was willing to debate and downplay the death of George Floyd in the hands of Minneapolis police.
I think he called him a scumbag.
Right, have no regard, downplay slavery and what Black people have gone through in this country by saying Juneteenth should never exist. And I think, there are a lot of people who are out there talking about him just wanting to have a civil debate.
Complete rewriting of history.
Yeah, there is nothing more effed up, than to completely pretend that, his words and actions have not been recorded.
The contrast between the two sides could not have been more striking. As the congressman explained, conservatives continue to defend free speech and open debate, believing that disagreement should be resolved with dialogue, not destruction. On the other hand, many Democrats, he argued, have embraced a culture of cancellation, silencing opposing viewpoints, labeling dissent as hate, and, in extreme moments, tolerating acts of political violence. The hypocrisy, he said, was staggering. Those who claim to fight for tolerance are now embracing intolerance in its most dangerous form. As the hearing drew to a close, the message reached far beyond the marble walls of Congress. Political violence isn't a partisan issue. It's a national threat. When lawmakers like Ilhan Omar respond to tragedy with mockery rather than compassion, it erodes the very trust that holds a republic together. The congressman's final warning sent chills through the chamber. If America continues down a road where disagreement is met with destruction, the nation itself will not endure. This was more than a speech. It was a wake-up call for every citizen who still believes in justice, peace, and truth. Inside Congress, emotions ran high. Republicans voiced outrage, calling Omar's remarks disgraceful and unworthy of her office. Democrats, however, largely remained silent, unwilling to condemn one of their own. That silence spoke louder than any statement. It showed how loyalty to party had begun to outweigh loyalty to principle. Beyond Washington, Americans were stunned. Even those who rarely follow politics were shocked to see a sitting congresswoman mock a man's death. Within hours, clips from the hearing went viral. Hashtags like hashtag Justice for Charlie and hashtag Omar Resign began trending nationwide. Comment sections filled with disbelief and sorrow. People asked how such cruelty could exist in a nation that claims to value both human life and free expression. It wasn't just conservatives expressing anger. Independents and moderates joined the chorus, saying the line between criticism and cruelty had been crossed. Words, especially from public officials, have weight. And in this case, Omar's comparison of Charlie Kirk to Frankenstein wasn't just offensive. It symbolized a broader decay in moral standards. When leaders joke about death or dehumanize their rivals, they do more than shock audiences. They normalize hate. The hearing underscored this danger clearly. The more politicians treat opponents as enemies, the closer America drifts to losing its moral compass entirely. Perhaps the most frustrating part of it all was the silence of the mainstream media. Major networks barely mentioned Omar's remarks, while smaller conservative outlets covered the story nonstop. The double standard was unmistakable. When tragedy involves someone on the right, it's often ignored. When it involves someone on the left, it dominates headlines for weeks. The congressman's outrage wasn't about one post. It was about a pattern. He reminded everyone that Democrats have ruined careers over a single tweet or an offhand comment. Yet, when one of their own mocks a death, there's no outrage, no apology, and no accountability. That, he said, is the essence of cancel culture. Punishment for some, protection for others. This imbalance, he warned, is why so many Americans have lost faith in institutions that once claimed to defend equality and justice. The selective outrage is not just unfair, it's corrosive to democracy itself. Then came Director Patel's testimony. He spoke carefully about the FBI's partnerships with social media platforms to monitor online threats. But his tone was cautious, almost uneasy. Many Americans fear that these same partnerships are being used not to stop violence, but to silence dissent. If the agency truly hopes to prevent political violence, the congressman said, it must act without bias, investigating threats wherever they arise, not just those linked to one political ideology. Beneath all the political drama, the deeper issue wasn't about left versus right. It was about humanity. Every time a public figure mocks death or excuses violence, something essential to society weakens. The congressman's warning carried moral weight. Division doesn't just harm reputations, it fractures families, friendships, and communities. If Americans lose the ability to disagree peacefully, they risk losing everything that makes freedom possible. This confrontation symbolized something larger. Not a battle between parties, but a struggle between truth and corruption, conscience and convenience. The congressman's fiery closing words cut through the noise. America's survival depends on moral courage. When one side excuses violence while the other demands accountability, it's not just a policy fight. It's a fight for the nation's soul. The hearing ended, but its message lingers, a warning against moral blindness and political hatred that could haunt the country for generations. In the days that followed, public outrage only grew louder. Citizens demanded action. Calls for Omar's censure filled the halls of Congress, and petitions circulated nationwide, urging lawmakers to denounce political violence wherever it appears. That public response sent a message of its own, that Americans still care about fairness, decency, and accountability. But they also made it clear, if their leaders refuse to live by those same principles, the people themselves will demand justice. In the end, this was never just about Ilhan Omar or Charlie Kirk. It was about the kind of nation America chooses to be. The hearing exposed an uncomfortable truth. Democracy cannot survive when violence becomes normalized and morality becomes optional. The congressman's words echoed as both a warning and a prophecy. Once a nation begins to justify hatred, it dismantles the very foundation that makes freedom possible. The choice now lies with the American people to rebuild around respect and peace, or risk descending into chaos from which it may never recover.